Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things just from the Canadian perspective as well, with regards to the way that Trump has what targeted what I would say is probably their closest ally. I feel like a lot of Canadians were feeling quite betrayed by this, whether or not he agrees with our political leaders or if he likes Trudeau or anything. Um, Canada and America have been pretty good friends for many years now, and I think that a lot of people were feeling quite betrayed by the level of aggression towards Canada with these tariffs. And in addition, on that front, the I think the big thing is really the annexation comments about Canada. That's really igniting Canadians' patriotism and their willingness to go out of their way to not buy American products and be much more willing to accept counter tariffs and such than they may have been otherwise. Because I just think that the the way that Trump has leaned into that kind of perspective, and that what I think most people thought was a joke at first, um, and he's basically said that it's not really a joke. He clearly would like to get a piece of Canada if he could. I think it's clear that we're not really into that, but I think if Trump could get it, he would be more than happy to take it. And so I think that Canadians are viewing this as a much more existential threat than they may have, and they did in the previous tariff disagreement war, whatever you want to call it, with Trump in the first place. So I think that we'll find a lot more willingness to fight with the Americans on this in an actual trade war than there may have been in the past, because I really do think that most people are viewing this as like an existential threat. So we're not, and Canadians aren't really ones to go down without some sort of fight. So it's not really surprising that you would get basically no real agreement from the Canadian people if you were going through as a leader and being like, I'm not going to do retaliatory tariffs, because Canadians feel like that we've been unjustly hit by the Americans. We made a deal with Trump and he's decided the deal is not really good. There's that great clip of him saying that, who wrote that deal? They're so stupid, or something to that effect. And it's like, you guys made the deal. It was Trump administration who signed the deal. So I think that there is a fair amount of justified anger among the Canadians for this. And I understand that like there's some industries where we are tariffing the Americans and such that it was probably viewed as unfair by the Americans. But the main thing on that front is they did agree to them in 2018 or 2019. I don't remember when the deal exactly was signed. So it just feels a little much to just roll in, be like, oh, these are the problems, and there's all this stuff, and that deal was terrible. Yeah. The people who wrote that deal and signed that deal are so stupid. And when it's literally, Trump himself who signed the deal. Yeah. So I just think that I just wanted to kind of talk about the Canadian perspective here, because I feel like we may not have been kind of talking about how Canadians feel. More so we were kind of talking about like how Americans feel and how the tariffs would actually affect things. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, Tristan, and everything you said was fair. But unfortunately for us, I quite frankly, I just don't think Trump really cares about what Canadians think of him, because I don't know. You got to think of it from his perspective as well, right? So, from his perspective, it's like event. Talk about reputational damage between the U.S. versus Canada. It's like, yeah, there is a lot of reputational damage, and Canadians don't like Americans now. But to an extent, Canadians have always found a lot of pride in proudly speaking about how we're not Americans. So that's always been, there's always been a little bit of like a competition rivalry going on, and that rivalry has gotten worse for sure under Trump. But again, like Trump, his there's nothing for him to gain personally by appealing to Canadians. There's no point in his approval rating going up in Canada because it doesn't really help him. And eventually, and he's also term limited, so it's this last term. Eventually, he's not going to be president anymore, and then when a new president comes in, I would imagine that the relationship between Canada and the US would get better again when that happens, right? So in terms of like really long-term damage, I don't know. I think people are generally forgetful in another like 4 to 8 years after Trump is no longer president. I don't know if that's going to be a thing anymore. But Sunil, you raised your hand first. You both raised your hand, but Sunil, you raised your hand first, so I'm gonna give it to you first.
Yeah, I think that like it's the Canadian perspective is a reasonable perspective. I'm not challenging it. I'm just like I think that we do have to understand what how Americans feel here, and Americans feel, and it's an increasing number of Americans feel that they like spend a lot of money, and they've signed a lot of asymmetric deals with allies because they needed things from allies throughout the years, and I just don't think that the status quo on trade that like the Western world is used to with the United States is sustainable, and Trump might not, he might get rid of the tariffs and might try to be friends with Canada again and all that stuff. But like in the end, there is a time where America stops respecting these asymmetric deals. And I just think Canada needs to be prepared for that world, because it means that Canada is going to need to get more competitive in a lot of our industries, and we're going to need to find ways to get our products to market because we are an export economy as a resource economy. So I just think that like the world where America's like empire retreats, they're not going to retreat from like having Canada as this like quasi protectorate of the North. Like we're just kind of in a tough spot because like we're the country that's like closest to the United States, and we're probably not going to be the one that's going to be able to leave America's sphere of influence, whether we like it or not. I also don't like. I think a lot of the rhetoric I saw this week with Canadians talking about like we're gonna like make a free trade deal with China, and like China's gonna be our friend and protect us. Like it's not happening, guys. And like Europe's in decline, so all the Canadians that are like all this vitriol about how we're just going to join Europe, like our politicians are even saying it. Like, I'm just trying to be like pragmatic here, and I'm telling you, like, America is always going to be Canada's biggest trading partner, and we're going to have to get used to a world where America might force us to get rid of some of these asymmetric quota deals that we have with them. And it might not be next year; it might be in 10 years, but it's going to happen.
I think on that front, though, the way that Trump has been acting, I think will encourage Canadian politicians and the government, et cetera, to emphasize trade deals and pipelines and infrastructure that they were previously dragging their feet on or blocking to go through. So, for example, like some of these pipelines to the west and east coast, I think there's going to be significantly more support for these since the Americans have been acting in such a adversarial role this last while, and thus making our trade with the Americans less secure. I think it's really opened our eyes on how reliant we are on them. So I think there's going to be a big push to diversify our trade partners. To what extent, we can diversify, that's another problem in itself. But I think that there will be efforts going through to trade more with external markets, which, to what extent that is successful will remain to be seen. But I think that the likelihood we have like a additional pipeline being built, at least one of the directions within the next 5 years, is significantly higher now than it was even like a couple years ago, right? So that I think that's
so what you're saying though is that Canada will be better off because of Trump's threats, like for better or for worse. Like Canada will get a good result in the end if it motivates us to build a west to east pipeline that only goes through Canada, because I think we all agree we should have been doing that before anyways, right?
I think it depends on how they do it and when they do it and if they can do it, because like it's all good and fine for us to be like they will do it, but if the tariffs basically put us into the deepest, darkest recession possible, it ain't happening anytime soon, right? So
Yeah,
that's
no,
the other factor.
I think it's an interesting point though, like that, like they may have woken us up out of our complacency. Maybe Trump woke us up.
It's definitely going to take a long time, but I think, again, as I said, I think this is something that we should have done anyways. And the fact that we don't have a west to east pipeline that doesn't go through the US, that's a national security threat, like just to begin with, right? Because you never know, anything could happen. If it wasn't for Trump, maybe another strongman president rises like 10-15 years from now, and if we don't like make any moves, because the US has been nice and friendly, they haven't forced our hand like Trump has, then we would be stuck in a similar situation, just in another 10-20 years or something like that, right? So I think that this is like, as Bitcoiners, I think you guys would understand this analogy. This would be like if you had your seed phrase at your best friend's house, right? Like, not that you don't trust your best friend, or if you don't, like, not that you guys are on bad terms, but it's like it's a bad idea to trust somebody with your seed phrase that's not yourself, right? It's just the fact. Your best friend, there's, even if there's a 0.0% 1% chance that they could betray you, then like why take that risk, right? I think that's like what we've been doing. Is like the US is our best friend, we can trust them completely, so we'll only build pipelines that goes through them because it's more convenient, and we can split the costs and have all these benefits. Well, then look what happened, right? Who raised their hand? I didn't see, but somebody did.
Oh yeah. So I just wanted to add one additional point, like, of America just like suddenly breaking all its agreements. Like the last time, they do this a lot actually, but like this, it does remind me of like the Nixon shock that we, like, a lot of Bitcoiners we like to talk about, where like Nixon just suddenly changed the rules of the world. A lot of countries were like mad, like American allies were like speaking about America in ways like they're not our ally anymore, we don't love them anymore. Like they were speaking about America in very nasty ways at that point too. But I just think that people are gonna, just like that one, people are gonna forget about it and be pragmatic and realize that they need access to the U.S. markets, and they are gonna mostly focus on getting access to the U.S. markets in the future, regardless of what diversification happens. But yes, Canada does need to have like infrastructure diversification. We can't just keep using U.S. infrastructure to get our oil to market. It doesn't make any sense at all.
With regards to the way that we've built, our reliance on the U.S., I think part of the way the economy's been going for the last probably 10-ish years in Canada, we've been kind of, I would say, stagnant. We haven't really been growing a whole lot. I feel like economy has not been a very top priority of the government that's been in power for the last 10 years ish. So investments into infrastructure like pipelines or anything were much less of a priority. They were significantly more concerned about climate concerns, etc. And there's a lot of bureaucracy preventing those routes from going through with building any of that. I think that we will find much more rapidly that bureaucracy will disappear now that the pipeline goes from helping our economy to potentially like saving our economy, right? So I think that that's something where we've been really dragging our feet on some of these infrastructure investments that I think in the long term will benefit us more financially speaking. And maybe part of this is like, I think from my perspective in the past, I've been pretty skeptical on pipelines, but I think it's come to my understanding that while climate change is important, we're actually doing a lot to resolve climate change, a lot more than I think people realize. And so at this point, we're not going to completely get rid of oil, but we can reduce climate change in general. So we'll still need to extract the oil and we'll still need to sell it to someone. And if we're going to be maintaining our economy on the world scale, we basically aren't going to be doing that without exporting oil. There's just no real way that Canada doesn't use its largest natural resource that is of great demand. So I think at this point we have to accept that, as much as we think that in the long run maybe oil will become more obsolete or less useful, it's not going to go anywhere in the next like 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It may go down in demand, but it probably is not going to be completely out of fashion. Like, you still need oil to make like plastic and stuff, and plastic isn't going anywhere. So getting these pipelines built and getting Canadian oil to other countries would be a nice boost to our economy. And I think it's pretty much the only way that we really prevent ourselves from being super duper reliant on the States, because that's the only real major industry which we can ramp up to the point which has sufficient demand that we can actually have a real trade output. Like, especially given that there's significant countries like Japan who are entirely import all their oil basically, like just on the Pacific Ocean, where we could be exporting a ton of oil to, who already have to import oil for all their oil stuff. So it's just it just makes sense at this point, I think, and I think that Trump probably did light a candle under us. I don't know which party will be in power in a few months, whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives, but I think that either way, there's going to be a significantly more emphasis on the economy than there has been in the past. So, which I think is a good thing in the end.